Hey, don't throw that away. Yeah, that's perfect for the garden. Let's upcycle. Remember that the soil is filled with microorganisms that you want to keep healthy and want to keep producing and growing. And if you can add something that's going to allow them to feed on more nitrogen like this, then you're going to end up in a better place with your plants. Guten Yardening, everybody. If you are a coffee drinker, then in all likelihood you've had experience with some of these coffee pods. As we've moved away from the larger servings to the single serving size, I would argue that these are becoming more and more plentiful. And if I decided to just throw this away or try to recycle just the exterior, what I would be doing is missing out on an opportunity to upcycle these to a very valuable part of our seed starting process in the garden. So in today's video, we're going to focus on the ways that you can use almost every single part of this more than once, and it's going to be beneficial both to your garden and to the environment. Now, while there are a ton of different varieties of these cups or pods, they typically follow the same design. They have a plastic exterior, foil of some sort on top, and then the coffee grounds are encased inside. And so what we do is we open up the top with a knife, and once we have it opened up, we can take a knife and scrape out the coffee from inside. Now this coffee, you might notice, has some mold on it, just a little bit of mold there, and that's not a problem for us. The general consensus is that mold is not going to be harmful to anything, and it's actually probably a part of the process of this starting to break down, a natural process there. And so I'm going to talk to you about how you can use that coffee in a second, but I want to show you what we're left with in here is a paper interior that is compostable and this plastic. If you like this content, don't forget to push like and subscribe. Now, I've done quite a bit of research in trying to understand the effect that spent coffee grounds have on the garden, on the compost, in vermiculture setups, and what I've learned is pretty interesting. First of all, the average pH of spent coffee grounds is not actually very acidic at all. In fact, it's somewhere between a 6.3 to about 6.8 pH. So it's basically neutral. So adding spent coffee grounds to your garden is not likely to increase the acidity of your garden if that's your goal. The second thing that I researched about this is that in terms of the NPK levels, the nitrogen, the phosphate, and the potassium levels, this is somewhere around 2% by weight of the nitrogen, and then it has lower, about 0.3% of each of the phosphate and the potassium. So it's not going to add a lot to your garden in terms of the P or the K, but it is a pretty nice ratio of that nitrogen by weight. So in the past, we've added some of this to our garden in a sense as a mulch. We've only added about 1/8 of an inch or so, but it's supposed to help with the tilth of the soil, the overall health and structure of the soil. Remember that the soil is filled with microorganisms that you want to keep healthy and want to keep producing and growing. And if you can add something that's going to allow them to feed on more nitrogen like this, then you're going to end up in a better place with your plants. Similarly, we've added this to our compost. This certainly helps the heat of the compost. This is also something that's really worked well for us when we fed it to our worms in our vermiculture setup. Now, we don't go overboard when it comes to putting this in our vermiculture bin because the nitrogen will help it to heat up as it breaks down, and we don't want to overheat and kill our worms, but they do seem to enjoy this as one of our greens to feed on. Now, if all we got out of these pods was the spent coffee grounds, that would be fantastic. But in addition, there is this little filter in here, and the filter itself is also something that we can throw in the compost as it will break down. The only thing you have to make sure you do is to remove any excess foil from the top, but that's not overly difficult to do either. And so this piece is going to go into our compost as well. Now, with all of that broken down, what are we left with? We're left with a whole bunch of these plastic containers. And what's really cool about the plastic containers is they have a hole punched in the bottom already. Now, these are food-safe plastic containers. Different varieties use different types of plastic. Hopefully you find yours are the number 5 plastic, which is the polypropylene, which is definitely considered food safe. And so what you can do if you have that variety of food safe plastic, and again, you have this hole punched in the bottom, what we have is the perfect container for seed starting. And that's exactly what we've done here. We have 2 trays of these set up for our kohlrabi. We have a giant kohlrabi and we have a white kohlrabi. Both of these we were able to plant multiple seeds, and you can see in this one I have 3 seeds planted in here, but multiple seeds planted in here, and there's plenty of room for them to start off until they're ready to be transplanted out of this size container. And in each one of these little trays I have about 17 different cups of kohlrabi, each of them containing somewhere between 2 or 3 kohlrabi. This is a fantastic way to start out because we're not taking up that much space, and we're able to see the seeds germinate, and they're growing with, again, plenty of size up until the point where we're ready to transplant them. Now the bonus on top of all of this is that the tray that these are sitting in is actually a food tray that's also been upcycled. It's one that we got some hot lunch in at some point from the grocery store, and now, because this doesn't have any holes in it, because it's guaranteed to be food safe, what we're able to do, because of the little hole in the bottom here, is practice one of the things we talked about when we did our video on seed starting mistakes. Rather than watering from the top, we can actually water into the container, into the upcycled container underneath, and these will, because of that hole underneath, absorb up as much water as they need. So in this case, we have the ideal setup brought to us by a cup that is now, this pot is now almost completely upcycled. The only thing that we're not using, because we haven't come up with a use for it yet, is this foil top. Beyond that, we are reusing, and we can reuse multiple times the rest of this container. Isn't that awesome? So we're not going to be sending this into the trash. We're going to be sending this into multiple places around our garden that's going to benefit the plants that are growing, the worms that are growing, and that's giving us an opportunity to create a very much adjustable space. If I have even less space than this, and this is about, what, 2 square feet of space, I could adjust this accordingly. Maybe I only start 3 or 4 of these in a different Tupperware or other plastic container that, again, I can use this feature, this hole in the bottom, to water. And what I have here is a very simple upcycle that's going to help us reduce waste, and it creates a really easily modifiable space for us to start many of our vegetables. Well, we hope you enjoyed this video and found it practical and helpful. And if you did, don't forget to give us a like, leave us a comment, remember to share and subscribe, and most importantly, remember, when you're with us, you are good to grow.